This morning, I have my water bottle up here. I've been dealing with sinus issues. I asked the doctor the other day, could I get a sinus transplant? Could he put me on a list? And he said there's no such thing. So in the meantime, I have to take medicine and use water. I felt kind of unsure about myself this morning when I got done preaching. I thought, that could have been a lot better. And many of you, as you always do, gave me some great compliments. And I thought, well, maybe I need to take medicine more often before I preach on Sunday morning. Good to have you with us tonight. I was watching football this afternoon, and one of the players was having a great game. Won't mention who it is. He was having a great game, had made several great plays, and they showed people in the stands, and they started doing this. You've seen them do that when somebody does a great job. They act like they're bowing down to them in honor or reverence. And I thought to myself, we do love our sports, don't we? Many people worship their sports teams. They worship or idolize certain ball players. We love our sports. And it just proves what I've always said, and you've heard me say from the pulpit several times, people will worship something. Everybody worships something. Not everyone worships the one true God of the Bible, but they worship something, whether it be money, their job, their career, their sports team, whatever it is, people will worship something. I believe we were made to worship. I believe everyone has that innate ability to worship and desires to worship. Not everybody, of course, worships the right thing, the right object, and in the right way. In Matthew chapter 4, Jesus is confronted by Satan, who takes him up to a high mountain that overlooks the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And the devil says to Jesus, "All these things I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." Now understand what Satan is offering here. He's offering Jesus a dazzling shortcut method to getting what he wants. I mean, he'll give him a crown without a cross. All he's got to do is sell his soul to the devil, right? Jesus responds with these words, "Go, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Our worship should be reserved exclusively for the one true God, in him alone, because no one else is worthy of our worship. John 4:24 tells us that we are to worship in spirit and in truth. And as we've talked about in this series, in spirit means with sincerity of heart, and in truth means according to God's plan, according to his directives. It is our very nature to worship. The standard, though, has been set. That standard is truth. And we are to worship in sincerity and in truth, and with the right attitude, the proper heart, worshiping the proper object, which is God. I think we would all agree that there is a spiritual void in all of us. We might call it a God-shaped hole in our heart. Not everyone fills that hole or that emptiness with the right things. Not everyone worships the right thing or the right object. We are spiritual beings, and it is our spiritual nature to seek a higher power, something greater than ourselves. But what we seek is not always what should be sought. You look around the world today and you find a lot of spiritual seekers, and I use that term loosely. You find a lot of people buying into New Age religions and new things that are popping up all the time. They want to fill that void, but all too often they're trying to fill it with something that is materialistic, or something that is an idol, that is not the one true God of the Bible, because they want that feeling of worshiping something. They want that feeling of being spiritual, but they don't really want to give up anything in the process. And as we have talked about this morning and throughout this year, it's really kind of been our theme. We have to understand our role in all of this, and our role is that we are slaves, that we are bondservants. Bondslaves or bondsmen, as the Bible talks about. We are the slave in this relationship, and Jesus is the master. And so therefore we don't call the shots. We don't get to determine how it works or how we worship or who we worship. That has already been set. Worship is a universal experience, and it is not confined to those who follow the God of the Bible. For centuries, people have worshiped anything and everything. People used to worship created gods, the God of the moon, the God of the sea, the God of the sun, whatever it may be. People have fashioned idols for centuries. People have found ways to worship anything and everything rather than seeking the one true God of the Bible. Of course, we know that the life of a Christian is about becoming more like Christ. And one cannot do that until he has learned the true meaning of worship. I think Ralph Waldo Emerson hit the nail on the head when he said this: the gods we worship write their names on our faces. Be sure of that. And a man will worship something, have no doubt about that either. He may think that his tribute is paid in secret in the dark recesses of his heart, but it will come out. That which dominates will determine his life and character. Therefore, it behooves us to be careful what we worship. For what we are worshiping, we are becoming. In Acts 17, verses 25 through 27, while preaching to the people at Mars Hill, Paul states this. He says, He himself gives to all people life and breath and all things, and He made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined their appointed times and the boundaries of their habitation, that they would seek God, if perhaps they might grope for Him and find Him. Remember who Paul was talking to here. Remember his audience, people who were groping and seeking for everything but the one true God, right? You couldn't throw a rock and not hit a temple to some unknown god or some idol. Paul is preaching to these folks about the necessity, the vitalness, the essentialness of seeking the one true God, to seek the Lord. That is the reason why we are here. We were made for this, folks. This is what we are here for, to give God our whole heart, soul, mind, and strength, that we may come to a knowledge of His existence and His character. Paul uses the terminology for to grope for Him and find Him. The Greek here means to touch or to handle, and then to ascertain the qualities of an object by sense or touch. Paul's words carry the sense of meaning to search diligently and accurately for God, to learn His existence and His perfections. In seeking God, we're seeking communion with God. We're seeking that intimate relationship with Him, drawing near to Him as He draws near to us. We worship God. We are here to encounter God in worship, but herein lies the problem. And that is that the nature of worship has been grossly misunderstood in many cultures and even in our own. How we encounter God has long been a source of debate. Some view worship as an attitude. Others see it as an act. Some view worship as something so vague that it defies definition, that you can't really put your finger on it, you just do it, and whatever comes out becomes worship. The issue of worship has become a muddied and confusing subject. Therefore, it must be accurately defined. And to understand what it means to worship, we must understand the terms that are used in the New Testament for worship. There are 10 Greek terms which are translated worship. 3 of these terms appear only once. 9 of them combine with the Greek term seb, S-E-B, to mean to venerate. Now the word liturgeo appears 5 times and refers to spiritual service, such as sending benevolent contributions or participating in preaching, teaching ministries. But the 2 most common words, the 2 most descriptive words translated as worship in the New Testament are proskuneo, which is used 59 times, and latreo, which is used 18 times. Now understand, proskuneo focuses more on the attitude of the worshiper, while latreo focuses more on the act of worship itself. Proskuneo means to take or to make obeisance or to do reverence to. It is a combination of 2 words, pros, which means towards, and actually kuneo, which means kiss. Proskuneo is defined as the custom of prostrating oneself before a person and kissing his feet, the hem of his garment, or the ground. It is used as an act of homage or reverence. Now, latreo means literally to serve or render religious service or homage. It can refer to the carrying out of religious duties, especially of cultic nature by human beings. Not only does this word imply religious significance, it's most noted to imply sacrificial significance. One form of this word means to serve or worship cultically, especially by sacrifice. So what we find through the use of these 2 terms is that worship involves 2 distinct elements. On the one hand, it involves the attitude of the worshiper, proskuneo, and the act of worship itself, which is latreo. Now, this is where many people veer off track, because many people end up in one of 2 ditches. They want to focus more on the inward at the expense of the outward. It's all about what's going on inside of me. It's all about having a worship experience. It's all about creating an environment in worship that caters to me, the individual. Talked about that a little bit this morning, that I believe in many of our churches today, we're creating consumers more than we are disciples. You have to understand, the customer is not always right when it comes to worship. Worship is defined by God, and therefore He is the audience. He is the one that sets the mandate, the restrictions, the boundaries for worship. We simply follow. And so many people focus only on the inward at the expense of the outward. But there's another ditch here. Many people focus only on the outward and not the inward. Is this not what the Pharisees did? They focused on the outward acts or the external without really understanding the Spirit, or at least engaging the Spirit like they should. And so when we focus only on the external, we become legalistic. We begin going through the motions, or we have what's called checklist Christianity. We just go through the acts, and we don't ever have the right spirit behind them. So there's two ditches here we want to stay out of. We have to understand that the two, the internal and the external, go together. They function together. True worship will involve both. You can't have true worship if you take one out and leave the other, or if you do one at the expense of the other. By definition, worship is a verb. It is an action demonstrating our hearts. It is something that we do. God has always commanded worship. And if you'll notice, whether it's the Old or the New Testament, He has always been specific about what is involved in worship of Him. Worship is the genuine, willful expression of our spirit in ways God has revealed through His Word. And so form is just as vital as attitude. Jesus, in His response to the devil in Matthew 4:10, said this, "You shall worship." The word there is proskuneo. "You shall worship the Lord your God and serve," that word is latreo, Him only. Jesus used both elements in responding to the devil. Worship must involve the right function and the right attitude. It must be internal and external. It's not enough to worship the right God. There must be the right worship of the right God in spirit and in truth are the keys. We are responding to the Lordship of Christ with all of our being, at least we should be in worship. Therefore, it must be done on His terms. As we said throughout this series, worship is not about what will meet my need, although you will experience something in worship. We don't like that word, but you should experience something in worship. You should be changed by worship. There should be something that happens when you come to worship. You should leave here a different person if you came to worship and gave your whole being to worship. Worship is not about what will meet my need, but about what God calls for. I think there's a major misconception in our culture that worship is kind of all-encompassing. That it's all about what you feel. It's all about what you do on your own time even. I can worship God in any way that I please. I can worship God in the deer woods. I can worship God when I'm fishing by being one with His nature. Everything is worship. You've heard that before, right? Everything we do is worship. That's not true. Otherwise, a serial killer could say that I'm worshiping God by killing others. Going to the bathroom is not worship. All right? Not everything is worship. Worship is a direct, meditated act. It is something that we do. It is something we engage in. It doesn't just happen without us trying. And it must be done with the right attitude and with the right form. Both of those elements are involved. Worship can be useless. Worship can be perverted. The first murder in history was the result of perverted worship, wasn't it? Cain Cain murdered his brother Abel. And really, if you go back to it, it was an issue of worship, right? Because Cain brought an offering that wasn't acceptable to God, and he became jealous, and he killed his brother Abel over the whole thing. We know that the Bible is not specific as to what Cain did exactly wrong or what exactly was the nature of his sacrifice that was displeasing to God. But we do know that Abel's offering was by faith. Hebrews 11:4 tells us that. It resulted from hearing and doing the will of God, and Cain's offering was not by faith, and thus proves the point that how one worships does make a difference to God. And the example of Cain is not an isolated incident. We know that there are many other examples in the Bible of worship that was done incorrectly and was displeasing to God. Nadab and Abihu, among others. You may remember in 1 Samuel chapter 13, verses 1 through 14, King Saul jumped the gun and offered sacrifices without divine authority. He was not a priest, yet he took it upon himself to perform the priestly duty. Samuel arrived to offer the sacrifice before Israel went to war with the Philistines. As the army began to scatter in fear, Saul took matters in his own hands, and he made the sacrifice. Samuel rebuked Saul by telling him, "You have acted foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God. Now your kingdom shall not endure." Worship can be useless. Just because we call it worship doesn't mean that it is. We don't get that right. Worship must be done according to God's will. God expects worship to be done as He commanded. No matter how sincere the motive, no matter what the cultural trends may be, no matter what the people desire, God wants it done His way. We do not choose how we worship. God does. An important point to grasp when it comes to worship is this: worship is not a dialogue between two equals. God is infinitely more above us. This is holy ground. May we never forget that we are treading on holy ground when we come to worship our God. God is God and we are not. He is the audience. We are not. He is the focus. We are not. He is the object. We are not. Worship has to be rooted in obedience, loving obedience to Him. Someone once said, we worship our work, we work at our play, and we play at our worship. That's a rather amusing way to state the plain truth that far too often we do not place the proper emphasis on our worship. And it's so unfortunate that worship has not only been abused, it's often been de-emphasized and reduced down to nothing more than a simple activity. We have lost, I believe, several things in worship. We have lost focus. We have lost holiness. We have lost reverence. We have lost humility, maybe even respect for the one true God. We have lost that sight of the real purpose for which we worship. In Exodus 3, starting in verse 2, it reads, "The angel of the Lord appeared to him," Moses, "in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not consumed. So Moses said, I must turn aside now and see this marvelous sight, why the bush is not burned up. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here am I. Then he said, Do not come near here. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. He said also, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Then Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. If we see nothing else in that passage, we see the reverence that was demanded there by God. Moses was fearful as he stood before God. He hid his face. He could not look. And the reason why is because he recognized that he was standing in the presence of the Almighty God. Moses realized that he was in the presence of a holy God and was not worthy to stand. Flip on over to the New Testament, we see the same thing with Peter when he has his first encounter with Jesus. He tells him, Lord, go away from me, for I'm a sinful man. Why would he do that? Because he realized that he was in the presence of Jesus Christ, and because of his sinfulness, he could not stand. He was in the presence of holiness, and he didn't deserve to be there. Throughout the Bible, we see people come in contact with God or Jesus, and their first reaction, their immediate response, is to fall on their faces and worship. Have we lost that to some degree? An encounter with God should always drive us to worship. It should always stir our hearts with reverence and love and humility and submission. An encounter with God should produce worship. In fact, that is what worship is. It is a response to the presence of God. It's an encounter with God. Worship is not jumping up and down and flailing our arms or a laser light show or dimming the lights. Worship is an encounter with God. It's our response to the presence of God. We do not deserve to be in His presence, yet we're here. While we are here, we must respond correctly. Worshiping in spirit and in truth means that I not only engage in the external acts, but that I incline my heart with the right attitude toward Him. In order for my attitude to be right in worship, three things need to take place. First of all, I must break my preconceptions. We cannot base our worship on preconceived notions or ideas. The standard for worship is already set. As we said, it's spirit and it's in truth. Doesn't matter what we would prefer or what we like. What matters is what's suitable to God. What does He prefer? Worship is not getting, it's about giving. Self-serving worship is not worship. As I said, we will get something out of worship when we worship according to His will. When we evaluate our worship, let us ask ourselves, how did that please God? Did that please God? Not how did that suit me? When we come to worship with preconceived notions, we have already set the tone. We have already decided that worship is going to be on my terms. May it never be. Secondly, not only must we break our preconceptions, we must also break our worldly focus. We must set aside our concerns of things that are going on in the world, whether it be our workplace, whether it be at home, whatever it is, as hard as it is, we need to set aside those worldly concerns and focus intently, because worship is a response. Worship is responding with my entire being to God. Hebrews 10:22 states, "Let us draw near with a sincere heart, in full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience, and our bodies washed with pure water." The right attitude involves drawing near. Drawing near to God with a sincere heart and with fullness of faith. It involves leaving the world outside and giving our absolute focus and attention to Him. Colossians 3:1-2 reads, "Therefore, if you have been raised up with Christ, keep seeking the things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on the things above, not the things that are on earth." And the final thing that must be broken is my heart. Psalm 51:17 reads, "The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. O God, you will not despise." Worship should express the heart of man. Sometimes tears may fill our eyes as our heart overflows with sorrow. Sometimes love overflows from a grateful heart with thanksgiving. Sometimes our heart pleads for God to relieve our pain. Whatever the case may be, there is never a time when worship cannot fill the needs of the heart and the soul. When was the last time you were moved to tears in worship? Not because you were hoping the preaching would end. When was the last time that you were moved to tears as you thought about the sacrifice of our Lord as you partook of the Lord's Supper? I know some of you have told me that you can't sing certain songs, not because you're not good at singing, but because of the words and because they impact you in a profound way. You know, it's difficult to do, but it must be done, that when we come here to worship together, we need to be seeking to leave everything else outside and focus intently on our God. Engaging our hearts. Giving our hearts to Him. Making certain that He has our entire focus. Those of you who have little kids, I've been there. That's hard to do. Very hard to do because they steal your focus away. But as much as possible, I want to seek to give Him our all. To focus intently on what it is we are doing and why we are here, because worship is an expression of the heart, and our hearts must be broken before God. We must approach the throne in complete humility and total submission. The sacrifice that we're bringing, there were sacrifices brought in the Old Testament for worship. The sacrifice that we're bringing is ourselves, our brokenness. We're coming before God to say that we are nothing without You. We are everything with You. We need You. We want You in our lives. If we're not broken, then that means we don't need fixing. All of us are broken. All of us need God. The proper attitude begins with the proper heart. I hope that if you've learned anything from this series, and I hope that this lesson tonight puts the punctuation point on it, I hope that if you've learned nothing from this series, you've learned how important worship is and how that God sets the boundaries, that He is the audience, that we need to be seeking to give Him our all. You know, I have a weed eater, and I'm not very fond of weed eaters. I don't really mind trimming the yard, but I'd rather not. As soon as Zane gets old enough and I feel comfortable with him doing it, that's going to be his job. Not because he does it better than me, just because he'll do it. I don't want the job. I don't like it. I don't like... You'd think with all the technological advances, we could make something that you didn't have to yank on 20 times to get it to start, wouldn't you? You would think there'd just be a button you could push to make it start. But as of the other day, I went out there to weed eat the yard, and I yanked on that thing for 30 minutes, never could get it started. And I'm not a very mechanically inclined person, so I can't fix it. So guess what's going to happen? The yard's not going to get weeded. We're going to have to get some cows or something. But anyway, I'm not fond of weed eaters. And as I've said with weed eaters or computers or anything else, they're great when they work. They're great when they serve their purpose. When they're not serving their purpose, they're really not of much use, right? Can the same be said about us? We need to be serving our purpose. We work best when we are serving our purpose. We are at our best when we are serving the purpose for which God created us. Over the next few weeks and over the next year and beyond, we're going to be talking about how we can be better here at Oldham Lane. Is that because I think we're not very good? No, I think we're great. I think it's a wonderful congregation. And every night when I pray, I thank God that He has placed me here at Oldham Lane with all of you fine people. Can we always be better? Yes. And something that Jake and Bradley and I and the elders have been talking about for many weeks now, and something that we are going to strive to do in the coming months and years, we're going to strive to be better. There's going to be some challenges. We're going to challenge all of you to step out of your comfort zone a little bit and do some things that perhaps you haven't thought about doing, because I don't want Oldham Lane to just be known for that church that's on the southeast corner of town. I want to be known for a church that is doing something, that is seeking to make a difference in the world, in our community. But we've got to get it right in here first. Not to say we haven't, but you've got to equip the saints if we're going to go out beyond these walls. I hope that we're all striving in our daily lives to be better. I hope that we'll all encourage one another to be better. And I hope that we look forward to this time together each and every week to where we can be together to worship the most important thing in our lives, the most important relationship we'll ever foster, the reason that we have hope, the reason for living. If you have a need tonight that we can help you with, maybe you're not a child of God, we offer an invitation to put Him on in baptism for the remission of your sins. If you are a child of God and perhaps you haven't been living in a godly direction and you need the prayers and support of this church family, be better tonight. Let us help you. Whatever your need is, come now as we stand in it.